Happy Monday and welcome back to the Gut 360 podcast. I'm your host, Ellie Breacher, a registered nutritionist on a mission to empower you to transform the health of your mind, body, and gut. If you're ready to get back into the driver's seat of your own health and unlock your full potential, you're in the right place, and I'm so glad you're here. Today, I'm joined by Clemmie Oliver, an IBD specialist nutritionist and the founder of Nutrition and Lifestyle Medicine Clinic, which is dedicated to supporting people living with inflammatory bowel disease, IBD, including Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, to reduce symptoms and improve their quality of life. She speaks regularly at IBD medical and patient conferences, works closely with IBD organizations, and has carried out postgraduate research in the field of IBD. Clemmie is deeply passionate about supporting people with IBD, not only because of her clinical expertise, but because, like me, she lives with IBD herself. This gives her a unique and compassionate understanding of the challenges faced by those navigating lifelong digestive conditions. Welcome, Clemmie, to the Gut 360 podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for the intro.
I'm so happy to have you here. Now, for anyone listening who is new to this, what exactly is IBD and what's the difference between Crohn's and ulcerative colitis?
I think that's a really good place to start because I think sometimes there's a bit of confusion around it. So IBD stands for Inflammatory Bowel Disease, and it's the umbrella for two main conditions, Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. So inflammatory bowel diseases, they are lifelong conditions. So once you get diagnosed with them, unfortunately, they are with you forever. Quite simply, they cause inflammation in the intestines. And this can cause debilitating symptoms, both in the gut, but also outside the gut as well. And they are what we call relapse and remitting diseases. So that means that someone might go through periods of being well when the disease is essentially kind of asleep. And then someone might go through periods of being unwell or in a flare-up or relapsing when the inflammation is active and the disease is active as well. And in terms of, you asked about the kind of the differences between the two. So Crohn's disease can affect anywhere from our mouth all the way down to our bottom. And they, I guess, like both Crohn's and colitis can cause similar symptoms, but there's some quite important differences. And that's one of them, that Crohn's affects mouth to bottom, whereas ulcerative colitis only affects the last part of the intestines, the colon. And the depth of the inflammation is different in the conditions as well. So Crohn's can penetrate all the way through the layers of the bowel, where ulcerative colitis, it only affects kind of the lining of the intestine. And also in Crohn's disease, the disease and inflammation can be patchy, whereas in UC, often we see it in a continuous pattern. So it might start at the rectum right at the bottom, and then it might move up, and then it affects either a small part of the colon or a larger part. So hopefully that gives a bit of a overview.
Definitely, that's a really clear place to start. Now, IBD is most commonly diagnosed in young adults between the ages of 16 and 30. But Clemmie and I were both early to the party, let's say. I found out I had Crohn's at 8, and Clemmie, you were 9 when you developed colitis, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so how has that shaped your life? Obviously, you've grown up with it since the age of 9. So what impact has that had on you?
Yeah, I think it's hugely shaped my life. I obviously don't know the person I would be if I hadn't had it, but it certainly shaped my career in terms of helping other people with inflammatory bowel disease. I may not have done that. I probably wouldn't have done that if I hadn't had it. And I think to a certain extent as well, it's shaped the person I am. I think it's made me really driven and determined to achieve and really make the most of my life, because I almost had it taken away from me. But on the other perspective, it also, I think, helps me to be more compassionate with people who are going through difficult situations and circumstances.
Definitely. I mean, that all totally makes sense. And how amazing is it that you have built this career for yourself based on your own journey? Obviously, no one should have to go through that, but what you've made of it and helping so many other people now is really, really inspiring.
That's awesome. I love it. So
no, it's amazing. We know we should be consuming fermented foods for our gut health, but have you tried kimchi or sauerkraut? This episode is sponsored by The Cultured Collective, whose kimchi and sauerkraut are naturally fermented, unpasteurized, and tested for live cultures, as well as being a source of fibre. They've won awards for their flavour, so I'm not the only one who thinks they taste amazing. It's really easy to add a scoop of these real live foods to all kinds of meals. I love adding kimchi to the side of my eggs and topping avocado toast with sauerkraut. They're offering listeners of the Gut 360 podcast a huge 50% off their kimchi and sauerkraut, so head to the show notes to find out more. IBD is also often confused with IBS, which sounds like an easy mistake to make, but we both know they're actually quite different conditions. So can you explain what the difference is between IBD and IBS?
Yeah, sure. And they do. I think it's the acronyms that confuse people, and also the fact that they are both bowel conditions. So you've got IBD, Inflammatory Bowel Disease, and IBS, Irritable Bowel Syndrome. And they get confused, I think, because there are some similarities. So a lot of symptoms do overlap. So you've got both of them can cause diarrhea, constipation, pain, bloating. They're both chronic conditions. So you have them for a long time, and neither of them have a cure. So there are similarities in that perspective, but there are really, really important differences that make them like very clearly different. And that is that IBD, as we've talked about, causes damage to the lining of the intestine through inflammation. It can be life-threatening. It most often than not requires medication and sometimes requires surgery. Whereas IBS is what is termed a more functional bowel disorder. So basically it's just the bowels aren't functioning as they should do. And the symptoms that you get with IBS can't be explained by any inflammation there or any structural abnormalities to the gut. It's just that the gut isn't functioning and working as it should, and that can cause symptoms. So there's no damage to the lining of the intestines. That doesn't mean to say that the symptoms can't be really debilitating for lots of people, but the symptoms aren't life-threatening. They don't lead to anything more serious. Sometimes medication is needed to help control those symptoms, but not the same types of medications that are used in IBD. And surgery is never used as a treatment option for IBS. So some similarities, but some really, really key and important differences.
Yeah, absolutely. Two very different conditions. Thank you for clarifying. I want to talk about the role of nutrition in IBD. So can food cause IBD, or is that a myth? Can it trigger symptoms?
Really good question. And I guess there are two questions there. One is, can it cause it? And the other one is can it trigger symptoms when you've got it? So in terms of nutrition's role in causing IBD, you can't blame just one thing, because IBD involves a really complex collection of things that come together to cause it. So you've got to have a genetic predisposition. So it's in your genes, whether you're going to get it or not. It's the gut microbiome is involved, the immune system is involved, and then environmental factors are involved as well, such as diet. So we can't say 100% diet cause someone's disease, but it could play a role. And that's actually what some of the research says. So some of the evidence suggests that food can increase or decrease someone's risk who is genetically susceptible. And what the evidence shows is that diets that are high in animal fats, high in red and processed meats, high in sugar, high in ultra-processed foods, low in things like fibre, they're associated though with an increased risk of IBD in someone who is already genetically susceptible. Whereas diets that are high in fibre, high in fruits and vegetables are generally associated with a lower risk in genetically susceptible individuals. And that seems to be particularly important in Crohn's disease, more so than in ulcerative colitis. So I guess the answer to the question is food can play a role in increasing someone's risk, but it doesn't cause it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. No, for sure. It's not like you made a mistake and ate something and caused yourself this disease at all. But what about triggers? What about people who have developed IBD? They've got Crohn's or they've got ulcerative colitis. What are some of the most common triggers that can aggravate their symptoms?
Yeah, sure. So food can definitely play a role when we're in the disease, when you have it. So the kind of common trigger foods that are well documented in the research, but I see in clinic as well, are things like caffeine, which is a bowel stimulant anyway. Things like spicy and fatty foods, which again, can cause symptoms in their own right. And often in a flare and sometimes in remission as well, people can find that high fibre foods might cause an impact too. But there are lots of other ones that some people find as well. And what we tend to see is that you'll get some people that have some symptoms with some foods and then not with others. So it's not a kind of blanket and universal, but the ones I've mentioned are the ones that come up most regularly. But something that I see that's commonly kind of misconstrued about the term trigger, like trigger foods, is that lots of people automatically assume that that means those foods trigger inflammation. But a food can trigger symptoms without triggering inflammation. And they do that through various different mechanisms that are nothing to do with inflammation. And I think that's a really important distinguishing factor that I'm often making to people. And that often brings quite a lot of relief to people. People think if they eat these foods, then they might trigger inflammation, or that if they're getting symptoms when they're eating food, that is all down to it triggering inflammation. And actually, most of the time with food, that's not happening. The symptoms are coming from something else, either the underlying inflammation if you're in a flare, or through other mechanisms like how fermentable that food is or how that food's behaving as it moves through the bowel if you're in remission.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really clear and very true. So obviously there's no one diet that works for everyone with Crohn's and colitis, but in general, how can nutrition support IBD apart from excluding foods that might trigger your symptoms? I think maybe let's divide this into someone who's in a flare and someone who is in remission, because they're going to be quite different, the answers. So firstly, if someone is in an IBD flare, what should they eat that can help to support them?
Yeah, sure. I think that's really right to break it down into like flare and remission, because they can be quite different. But what the evidence generally shows us is no matter whether you're in a flare or in remission, most of the evidence is pointing towards the fact that a Mediterranean style diet is the right approach and is the most helpful approach, because it has so many health benefits in terms of supporting a like diverse nutrient intake, supporting the gut microbiome and helping to prevent nutrient deficiencies, and also just helping to prevent other health issues as well. There are some specific trials, intervention trials, particularly in Crohn's as well, that have shown that the Mediterranean diet may help to reduce inflammation. So in both flare and remission, that is still the suggested approach. But there will be lots of people, if you have IBD, that you're listening to this podcast thinking, yeah, there's no way I can eat like that when I'm in a flare. And that's often what I see people saying to me in clinic as well. So very much when you're in a flare, it is about trying to keep the diet as diverse as possible, but adapting foods to make them better tolerated as they move through the bowel.
Okay. And so the Mediterranean style diet is generally a kind of pattern rather than a prescriptive diet. But what could that look like in practical terms? Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, let's say.
Yeah, sure. So like overall, the Mediterranean diet is based on fruits and vegetables and whole grains and nuts and seeds and legumes. And it includes fish and chicken and eggs and red meat in smaller quantities and sugary foods in smaller quantities. Like in practical terms, I guess like maybe I can look at doing some examples of like common foods that you might have and then how you would adapt that for flare or remission. Maybe that would be most helpful. So for example, say if like porridge is quite a common one that people might have for breakfast. Now in remission, you might have porridge with some mixed nuts and seeds sprinkled over the top, and you might have some raspberries on there, and that would give you kind of a meal that would give you a lot of the nutrients that you need. In a flare, it may be best to still have the porridge as the kind of basis for it, but rather than whole nuts and seeds, actually having smooth nut butters instead. So it's basically about changing the texture of the foods to make them easier to digest and smoother as they move through an inflamed bowel. So I'm often talking to people about like a smooth toothpaste consistency of food moving through the bowel, moving through areas of inflamed bowel to help to reduce any discomfort as that moves through. So you might do smooth peanut butter or smooth almond butter, and then rather than berries with seeds in them, you might swap that for banana, for example, or maybe some stewed apple or some peeled ripe pear. or something like that. So something with already like a smoother texture. Maybe you would pop those berries in a smoothie that you might have later on in the day with a little bit of yogurt, so that you still get the benefits and the nutrients from those, but you would just be changing the texture.
I love this. I think this is so, so useful. A lot of people who get diagnosed with IBD or any gut condition, also people even with IBS, they're often told initially that they need to avoid fibre and that fibre will trigger their symptoms, which can be true to an extent, but that doesn't mean you need to cut it out. It means, for example, with berries, you can chuck a handful into a smoothie, like you said, or with the nuts, just go for a smooth nut butter. So really helpful, actionable tips. I find a lot of the time people just cut out fibre entirely, and for the long term as well, even when they're in a really stable remission, because they were told once upon a time that fibre could be bad for them. So yeah, really, really important to highlight that. Thank you.
And I think that doesn't come from a place of the like low fibre, doesn't come from a place of neglect. It comes from a place of like, it's just old school, outdated information. And I see lots of patients who were diagnosed 15, 20 years ago and were being given that advice and just haven't been updated. But I also see people who were diagnosed last week who unfortunately are still getting that outdated advice. So it's just that the evidence has changed. It's just that the understanding of the role of fibre in gut health has changed. And that has completely changed the way that we advise people on what to do in a flare.
Yeah, definitely. You're absolutely right. This episode is sponsored by IM8. I used to catch every cough and cold going, but since taking IM8 Daily Essentials, I've noticed a real difference in how resilient my immune system feels. It combines key immune nutrients like vitamin C, vitamin D paired with vitamin K2 for better absorption, zinc, with probiotics, prebiotics, and postbiotics to help nourish a healthy gut microbiome, as well as a powerful blend of greens and antioxidants to help protect your cells from everyday stress. It's also not pixie dust levels and actually has an impressive dose for everything mentioned. Use the code GUT360 for a special discount and free welcome kit on your first order. Are there any specific nutrients that people with IBD should monitor, should make sure that they're not deficient in?
It's, again, quite disease specific and also would depend on if you're in a flare or in remission. Vitamin D is something that is really commonly seen to be deficient in people with IBD. Iron deficiency, it's also really common. And if you are someone who has Crohn's in the small bowel, and particularly in the ileum, which is the last part of the small bowel, then things like B12 deficiency and folate deficiency are also quite common. So what I tend to recommend to people is that really, like, if you're in remission and doing well, probably an annual blood test. The guidelines recommend this anyway. So an annual blood test to do your usual like full blood count, liver, kidney, etc. But also to get them to throw into that your vitamin D if they'll do it, your iron, and then if you do have Crohn's in the small bowel, looking at B12 and folate. But if you are getting symptoms that coincide with deficiencies of any of these, then that is something that should be investigated by your IBD team or your GP. And it's just a simple blood test, and then they can action anything off the back of that to help.
Yeah, definitely. And most of these should be really easy to get done on the NHS as well. So I think, yeah, absolutely. So how important is supporting our gut microbiome in IBD management?
It looks like from the research it's very important. There's still a little way to go to understand how we exactly manipulate the gut microbiome in terms of like specific strains, and also in terms of what that looks like in terms of disease outcomes. But what we do know is that we can change and alter the gut microbiome, and that can help to influence and reduce intestinal inflammation. And by helping to alter the gut microbiome, we can also help to support the lining of the intestines. And also, the gut microbiome plays an important role in immune activity. So, like theoretically, and in the research we have so far, it looks like the gut microbiome is a really, really important part of IBD management. And again, that's why it's so interesting how much and that's probably the main reason why the dietary advice has changed so much from low fibre, basically no fibre, because the understanding before was that just made you poo. Whereas over the last 15, 20 years of gut research, we now understand that fibre plays such an important role with the gut microbiome, and that's why it's changed completely and is a pivotal and important part of the diet of someone with IBD at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. Fiber is so crucial for a healthy gut microbiome in any way that you're able to tolerate it and able to get it in. And that diversity as well that we were talking about earlier. So getting in as wide range as possible of fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, to the extent that you can tolerate it, of course, because these foods do tend to be higher in fiber. But I also would love to talk to you about stress, because I think it's always really important to take this 360-degree approach to our gut health. So how do stress and emotional well-being affect IBD? And also, is that something that you've noticed in your own life?
Hugely so. So I guess I always do this, first of all, the research really clearly shows that stress has a massive impact on inflammatory bowel disease. And there have been huge papers pooling together data showing that stress can be one of the major triggers for the onset of inflammatory bowel disease, but also on triggering relapses of the disease. And that is something that I see in pretty much 100% of the patients that I see. But it's very poorly recognized, I think, by a lot of medical teams about how much stress plays into it. So definitely hugely impacts it through lots of different kind of complex mechanisms. And then also in terms of emotional well-being, we know that poor emotional well-being and things like anxiety and depression affect the disease, but we also know that the disease is more likely to cause those things. So it seems that there's a multi-directional impact that IBD has in terms of emotional well-being. But we do know that people who have anxiety, depression are more likely to fare worse with their disease. So I couldn't agree with you more that a 360 approach to supporting the condition is so important. I think that medical management is central. I often talk about pieces of the puzzle with patients when we're looking at managing a condition. Usually medical support and medications is quite a central piece of the puzzle, but that doesn't mean that the other supportive pieces aren't really important as well to create the complete picture of care. And I think a really big missing piece from so much of the way that IBD is managed at the moment, so much of it's missing. So I think the emotional, psychological support piece and also the nutrition piece is missing a lot and is just not available to lots of patients. So both play into it hugely.
I couldn't agree more. I know there is so much concrete research out there, but even if there wasn't, I think case in point, ask anyone with IBD and they will tell you it's a fact that stress is, for me, a bigger trigger than anything I could eat. Yeah, huge. Okay, so how has living with IBD changed or affected your relationship with your body? This could be positive, negative. Obviously, it's had a huge impact on your life as a whole. But in terms of your relationship with your body, what would you say?
I would say it's been a journey. I think I would say it's also been a journey because I journeyed through it through my entire life as well. I think I've definitely gone through periods of resenting my body for what it was doing and thinking why aren't you behaving like you should do, all of those things. And I'm sure lots of patients with IBD really resonate with that. But I think I guess through years of living with it now, and also having had lots of surgeries, and also now just having such a deep understanding of the condition and how the body works through my work, I'm now so much more compassionate to myself and to my body about how much it's been through and how incredible it is that I'm still here and that I still exist and that my bowels still work, even though a huge part of it's been removed. So I think the journey's been complex, but it's, I think, probably come to a happy place.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that a lot of people listening who do struggle with IBD will be able to relate to it being a journey, but also making you feel more grateful, more appreciative of what your body can do, almost in awe of what the body is capable of doing. So yeah, I think that's amazing. My final question before we move into a quick fire round is, If someone has just been diagnosed with IBD today, what do you wish someone had told you when you were 9 years old and you found out that you had ulcerative colitis?
First and foremost, diet does matter.
Yes.
Is just such a pivotal one, because I understood that much later than I should have done. And the reason I do the work I do is so that no one has to go as long as I did without understanding what a really life-changing and important part diet plays in the management of IBD. So I think that's kind of the first one, is diet really does matter and can be the difference between surviving with these diseases and thriving and living your best life with them. I guess the other thing I would say is it will be okay. Whatever happens, it'll be okay.
I think that is a really amazing piece of advice. Both of those actually so true, and better to realize sooner rather than later how much of an impact nutrition does absolutely have on IBD. So we finish each guest episode with a quick fire round. So are you ready?
Hit me.
What's something that seems healthy but often backfires for your health?
Supplements?
Absolutely they can do. What is one habit you see clients struggle with the most?
Chewing their food.
Oh, that's a good one. No one said that on the podcast before, but that is huge. What's your favorite gut-friendly food?
Fruits and vegetables. I know that's not a food, but it's a category.
That works. What's your go-to breakfast on busy days?
A real favourite in our household at the moment is a recipe that I've developed called pancake porridge.
Tell me more.
Oh, it's basically porridge that you make kind of like pancakes. You basically mash a banana with a couple of eggs, then you put the oats in and it forms like a mixture, and then you put it in a pan with some butter, and then you flip it like a pancake and then break it up like a porridge, and then you add your toppings, and it basically just adds a bit of extra protein and it tastes like a pancake, but it's like porridge, and I love it, and my 2.5-year-old daughter loves it too. So
that sounds delicious.
And it's really easy. It's actually quicker than porridge and much quicker than pancakes to make.
Yum. Amazing. What is one nutrition myth or wellness trend you wish would disappear?
I know these are quick fire, but I'm not very good at quick fire questions. I think going back to the supplements, that you can replace food with supplements.
So important. Food first, always. Definitely. Yeah. What did you personally get wrong early on in your career?
Worrying that things weren't moving fast enough.
Definitely. What's one healthy habit you're still working on?
Everything.
What's the main one?
I think mindful eating.
Really, really important.
As a busy mum, working mum, it's hard.
Definitely. We'll finish with a few fun ones. Coffee or matcha, or neither if you avoid caffeine?
Nothing. Neither.
No caffeine whatsoever?
No.
Herbal tea?
Love a herbal tea. Chamomile tea in the evenings, but I also love a mint tea at any other time.
Nice. Overnight oats or eggs on toast?
Eggs on toast.
Favorite coffee shop? You don't have to get coffee there. Just favorite cafe.
Probably Gale's.
Nice. Always works. And if you could only do one type of exercise for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Walking. 100%.
I love walking. Lastly, what's one word you associate with a healthy gut?
Diversity.
Amazing. Thank you, Clemmie, for being a guest on the Gut 360 podcast. Where can our listeners find out more about what you do?
I have an Instagram account at Clemmie Oliver Nutrition, and I also have all the information you need to work with me on my website, which is naamclinic.com.
Fantastic. Thanks, Clemmie, for your time, and thank you guys for listening to the Gut 360 podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, hit follow and please leave a 5-star review. It really, really helps this podcast grow and reach more people. And if you know anyone with IBD, Crohn's, colitis, please forward this episode to them if you think it could be helpful. Come connect with me on Instagram at Ellie Breacher Nutrition. I would love to hear your thoughts. Have a lovely week ahead, and I'll be back next Monday.